I would be very surprised if G2 doesn't make it.
For the second year in a row, it would be absurd, really, wouldn't it? I think I'd align with you.
Being
I'd
that
be mad as well.
dominant that someone's like, you miss Worlds 2 years in a row. That's unthinkable.
You could put Caps in with 4 gold players, and you'd probably be able to pick up a few wins in the LEC with how he's currently playing. So, like, the guy's a beast.
What's up? Welcome back to Recall, the bi-weekly global League of Legends show. I'm your host, still, Frosk, with, of course, the lovely Broxah and Medic. And this week, we're talking everything LEC and LCS specifically, as well as touching on the LCK and LPL in our march towards Worlds. Gentlemen, how are you guys doing?
Very great. Happy to be back.
Yeah,
You guys are always just like, one note.
Well,
Yes.
I mean, it's great, you know, like, it's great to be back. I think things seem to be speeding along very quickly. Like, we're already a third of the way through the LEC split, which is crazy to me.
Don't
and
say
Worlds
that.
is just around the corner. So, like, it's just like time flies when you're having fun, I guess.
Yes. Now, I believe the first region that we've got our check-in is actually going to be the LCS, and I know it's kind of been a minute since we've like peeked in on this region. I think the last time that we met, they actually hadn't started yet, or were just about to start. Correct me if I'm wrong. When was the last time that you guys ever saw CLG sitting at the top of the standings? They're right now 4-1, and I have to say, I think it's been close to 10 years.
Yeah, maybe in Brox's dreams, when he was playing on them, he saw them at the top of the standings.
Hey. Well, to be fair, I expected to see CLG very, very high up the standings last year, but I guess it didn't really go the way that I had hoped going into it. But yeah, I mean, CLG fans are having a good time right now because their team has been on a very successful Korean bootcamp by the looks of it, and they're doing very, very well.
Okay. So here's the thing. Like, normally, while summer does matter more than spring, because obviously it's the one that's leading into Worlds, and you get more representatives and more chances to go to the international event, typically, we don't start freaking out until later on in the summer split, just because early on in the split, you know, teams are a little bit rusty, they're kind of shaking off the break that they just had, they're figuring out the meta, and so normally you have kind of these wild standings where kind of like these middle of the tier teams kind of pop up and then everyone kind of overtakes them. Do we think this is kind of the same with CLG? Because right now the standings are CLG, and then you have kind of your usual suspects. Evil Geniuses, Team Liquid, 100 Thieves, Cloud9. These are all teams that when we spoke last, you guys were like, yep, those are probably going to be your front runners for Worlds, and it's just kind of CLG that just popped out over there. Or do you think that CLG are actually the real deal?
I think they're good. I think there's definitely a degree of they had a very good boot camp. Their read on the mess is very strong. They were playing a lot of enchanters, and against EG they showed they don't have to play enchanters bot to win. But I still think that until we get halfway through the season and they're at the top of the standings, I'm going to reserve judgment as to whether they're actually like a top tier team. Because so far they played Dignitas, they've played TSM, they played Golden Guardians, and they've played FlyQuest and EG. So, like, of the top
Strength
5
of schedule's
teams,
been pretty weak.
yeah, they've played one top 5 team, right? They haven't got 100 Thieves, they haven't played C9, they haven't played against TL yet. After this week, they play C9 and TL, and if they win one of those 2 games, I'm happy to say they're a top 5 team in NA, maybe even a top 4 team. But until they actually do that, it's kind of similar to Astralis in EU, who Astralis look really good, but they haven't actually really played the good teams yet, and they only played G2 and kind of lost to them. So,
in my mind, it's also worth pointing out that I think you can draw the comparison between. I mean, it's a little bit early to do so, but between CLG. The summer split to Misfits and LEC last split, where Misfits looked like I'm close to saying incredible, but I'm gonna say like a really good team in spring in LEC. But then once the pressure came in and once there was actually something on the line, everything just fell apart, and the other teams just pushed them over the edge and they fell apart, right? But like during the split when there was no pressure, they did really well, and I think CLG could easily be the same thing. Like, are they gonna have the experience and the star power to, make a push for Worlds? It would be rather unlikely, but it wouldn't be impossible. But at the same time, I think the way that they've been looking so far, the split has been great. They've been getting mostly easy games, like Medic mentioned, but they did have a pretty big win against EG, who just went to MSI. I also think their pickup in the top lane, Dokla, has been looking really amazing for them. He's been their MVP so far. Like, just comes in from academy and consistently monster performances, like every game. Like, he's always ahead in the early game, always doing really well on carry champions. And I think similar to Excel, they've actually seemingly benefited a lot from going to Korea and just kind of finding an identity, finding out how to actually make everything function. And then now they come in at the start of the split and clearly have at the very least, a slight edge on all the other teams.
So I'm really glad that you started bringing up kind of some of the roster adjustments that CLG have made. You guys have talked about kind of the Korean boot camp, or the fact that they've really been on the grind and trying to hit the ground running coming into Summer Split. I'm curious. So for North America, it does feel, at least in the past, that a top laner can make a really big, significant difference. And not that there haven't been incredible top laners. Normally when we talk about some of the greatest players of all time, a lot of them have been top laners when kind of coming into that conversation, and players that are really hyped up. But it feels like in North America especially, that top lane can really dominate and really change the course of the game. I'm kind of curious what your guys' take is on that, because I believe also MVP last split was also a top laner, if I'm correct, before going back to Korea. It was Cloud9's top laner.
Is it Summit?
I believe so.
Okay.
Yeah, Summit.
Yeah.
And I was just kind of curious what you guys think on that, because I've never, kind of scratching my head and thinking back, I can't think of the last time we had an MVP top laner for Europe. And while there are like great top laners in LPL and LCK, there's not really top laners that can just come in and just hard carry a game. And I'm curious why it happens in North America more often.
It's really interesting. I think Chachi is. Sorry, I just as a no. I think Chachi is the only top laner in Europe we've had win the MVP. I don't think
really
anyone else
Chachi's the only top laner.
Well, no, Huni won rookie, didn't he? Because that's when he did the little dance with his trophy. But yeah, I think Chachi might be the only top laner we've had win MVP in Europe. I may be wrong on that though. So.
Broxah, do you have any thoughts from like a player perspective?
Well, I think in a lot of ways, top lane is the most punishing role, where because it's such a long lane, like if you make mistakes, you're gonna get punished so hard, and it's really easy, to just fall out of the game completely. And I think when comparing Europe and North America, in Europe, top laners have more of a tendency to go for like the carry picks and play with more confidence. They feel like really pushing themselves ahead. Whereas in NA, it's mostly, I mean, there are carry players too, but I think you're usually pulling them on like safer options, comfort picks, where they can kind of sit on their own little island, which often when international play comes around can start bringing issues, right? And I actually know that part of why Impact was brought to Team Liquid back in the day was that he was able to not only always go even at worst, no matter who he went up against, but he could also bring a lot to the team in terms of shot calling and macro, which at the time wasn't something you would see a lot from a top laner, right? And obviously now things have changed a little, but I think the fact that you can get punished so hard creates like bigger skill discrepancies, because I mean, looking at a name like Impact, he's been the clear top 3 at worst top laner in North America for 5 years, and there doesn't seem to be that much competition coming in. I'm not sure why exactly that is, but it definitely is interesting.
I think it's actually really interesting to think about the change that has happened in top lane generally in Europe and in NA. Because I think a couple of years ago, I really would have agreed with you that European top laners tend to be more aggressive, right? As in, at least top laners playing in our league, they tend to look to like gain the advantage. Like Huni was a great example. Bwipo was a great example of when he was playing on Fnatic as well. But now actually both of them are over in the LCS. And if I look at the LCS top laners, I say, well, you've got Dokla, who's been, I think, playing like Jace, and
he's carry only player for sure.
Yeah, carry only player, right? You've got Fudge, you've got Bwipo, you've got Huni, And I think all of them, I'd say, I tend to be more aggressive. And then obviously you have like the stalwarts of Someday and Impact, right?
They play
Someday
the
and
win
Impact are
lane,
like
not
the
the
benchmark
go even.
of exactly, right? So I think it's an interesting shift, and I wonder if because Summit was an aggressive, he was a carry top laner as well. Because as a carry top laner in that environment, you can have such an impact. Whereas in Europe, even if you're a carry top laner, our top lane pool seems a little bit better at negating loss. So like Odo Omne, if he's on weak side, like he's weak side king, like he'll just back away and he won't give you anything. Whereas maybe the players in NA would be more willing to take those fights and sometimes lose it, thus making NA, like Summit especially, look so good because he was constantly winning his lane rather than just putting his opponent a little bit behind.
So if this is a case of North America
I think you're right.
just has, kind of more carry-oriented top laners that can have these types of pop-off performances. As the split goes on, as the meta changes, as more patch shifts come in, do you think that makes CLG more vulnerable to getting knocked off the standings if, say, something then is suddenly outside their top laners a champion pool? Or do you think that CLG, because they spent so much time in this boot camp, just kind of understand what their identity is and that they should actually be okay despite strength of schedule?
I think when you start playing best of fives, players with playstyles like Someday and Impact and with their level of experience will always have an advantage because going into the game that they're going to do really well and they're not going to make a lot of mistakes. Whereas if you have newer players with less experience on all these carry champions, it's like more of a high risk, high reward playstyle, and I think that even goes for someone like Bwipo. Bwipo is the type of player when he enters the Rift. Usually he plays well. It's a bit like Caps, I guess, where most of the time his aggression pays off, but you're going to have a game here and there where something goes wrong, right? With Impact and Someday, it's the chance of that happening is slightly lower, right? And I actually think you're right in the previous point, Medic, that a lot of the aggressive players have actually moved to NA now, and I guess I still have a bit of it's mostly like some recency bias looking at G2 because G2 is like actually the only team with like a real carry top laner now.
Yeah, it's a great example.
Broken Blade is a great example, but when you look at the rest, like Finn, Wonder, Odo Amne,
Chachi,
they are all playing. They're all playing the same way. So that's a good point. Times have actually changed. I'm stuck in the past.
It's so easy to be there though, because you have in your mind like the mentality of, oh yeah, top laners in Europe are really aggressive, and that was in my head as well. But it's just it like sort of times out. Coming back to the CLG point though, I think there is like a couple of different layers of development, right? So there's are you just on your Korean bootcamp like honeymoon phase? And after week 5, do you keep a good read on the changing meta? And can Dokla keep up? Broken Blade's a good example of that, where he was only carries, and then in playoffs he played Ornn. It was like 4 games of Ornn in a row, played it really well. They won. G2 were able to adapt, and like they won. And then like as Broxah says, best of 5s is a big trying point for these players, especially like I think Poom and Luger, I don't know if they've ever actually played a best of series. They may have done, but not at like the highest level. So at least in LCS. So it's gonna be a challenge, I think, for them if they do get that.
I also think already this upcoming weekend is going to be a big test for them because now they're going to play C9 and CL, who are 2 of the expected best teams, right? So if they can actually take wins here, that would be really impressive. And I also think just the fact that they are not only good individually, but also play really clean macro, makes me have some hope for CLG this split.
Yeah, I love the kind of middle point, if you will, of the split, because it's when those standings are the most volatile, and like people will start picking their front runners, but things can completely change after like a single weekend since there's so many teams that are so close together. As we kind of shift our perspective away from kind of the CLG, the evil geniuses at the top, and kind of look more towards the C9s, the FlyQuest, the Golden Guardians, the TSMs, is there anyone kind of at the bottom of the standings that you think can really dig up or change it around? Now I know, again, the last time that we spoke, you guys were pretty firmly agreed on Evil Geniuses, Team Liquid, 100 Thieves, Cloud9, not necessarily in that order, but kind of those names being the pick of the teams that would go on for Worlds. So kind of outside of that, I guess maybe Cloud9 with like the 2-3 records kind of right now on the edge of that, but like, is there any FlyQuest or Golden Guardians or TSMs that you guys think just kind of had a bad start and we'll clean it up and turn it around?
Do you want to lead, Broxah, or should I?
Who do you want to punch down on?
So, when looking at the bottom half of the standings, I think I would have some faith in Dignitas and TSM. Those are two teams that I've been looking at a little bit. I think for Dignitas first, they've picked up Gamsu, who sadly hasn't been too impressive so far, but I think there's still high potential there for various reasons, and mostly for me, looking at the Blue River mid-jungle duo makes me think that Dick has a decent chance of actually turning it around, because I think that duo has been looking pretty solid for them this entire year so far. For TSM in particular, it's been a bit of a mess for them this year up until this point, but I think if you look at the roster, they have really good individual players across the board, and what they need is decent structure around them and team play. And I would have faith in a team with this good of a lineup to actually figure out how to play as a team and how to play macro, really, because I think that's mostly what they need.
Yeah, I agree with TSM. I think, especially when you look at the fact they beat Team Liquid in, it wasn't like an unconvincing win. They played Team Liquid in their own game, were able to take them down, which is very impressive overall. But it just feels like there's a degree of lacking in terms of mid-game shot calling and synergy there. And a part of that, I think, is Maple is still relatively new to the roster, and him working out how he plays mid-game with Speaker is really important. Alongside that, I'm really looking at Cloud9 to climb up the standings. I know they're like kind of at the cusp, but I think watching them with Zven has actually been really encouraging over the last couple of games. So I'm really happy to see the guy move into support. I think he's an incredibly hard worker, and I think he deserved another chance at the LCS stage. So I expect we'll start to see C9 jump up a few pegs over the next few weeks.
So focusing on C9, because I love, no shade to you, Medic, but it's just it's such a softball, one of the greatest players that Europe has ever seen. To be like, I think that guy really deserves another shot at the LCS stage.
It's bad when I saw Berserker come in, because Berserker's a great player, all credit to him, but Zven, he deserved to be on a top team. He was good enough as an AD carry, in my opinion, to still be on a top team. So for him to then have the humility to go, okay, I'm gonna be a support. A lot of people do. They're not looked down on support, but it seems like I'm gonna play a role that has less overall impact in team fights and such, and do more shot calling and do more macro awareness and team up more with my.
It has always been a role where the cerebral players have really thrived, and we've seen a lot of role swaps that have been successful into the support. Zven, obviously, kind of the newest for LCS, but if you look at who he never really got a ton of credit as a mid laner, but as soon as he swaps over into support, suddenly there's a big boom for him.
Core JJ is a great example as well.
Core JJ also probably still one of the top 5 players that North America has ever produced, and definitely I personally think in top 5 players of the world. I really value Core JJ that highly, but I just feel people are so kind of oh yeah, Zven will be good at support, but I'm this guy was so cerebral as an AD carry. You would watch Zven play, and how he controlled lane, how he understood the minion waves, how he was always communicating, the fact that he was with Mithy for such a long time, and then Mithy went over into a coaching position. I feel this should be the secret formula to unlocking Cloud9, because they clearly have such a talented roster with all of these players that have found talent, not just in their original positions, but also in outside positions as well as other teams, that all they really need is just that final little push to get them kind of back up to the success that we expect Cloud9 to be. And for me, I'm really riding high on the Cloud9 and Zven being in a support position. I don't know why people are oh yeah, this will probably be good. I'm just kind of curious what the trepidation is there. Trepidation.
I think the trepidation is always on paper it made perfect sense, right? And as you say, very cerebral player, very wide, very smart about the game, etc., right? But whenever you bring a player into a role that they haven't played before at the highest level, you expect some sort of teething issues, right? And you expect it could all fail. We've seen super teams be aligned so many times in Europe. Look at Vitality, to see these guys were the 5 best in their role, maybe apart from Lebrov when they joined the team, and then it's just collapsed, right? So that was where the trepidation was. That that trepidation's now gone out of the window. You know, I'm all aboard the C9 hype train. Sven's great. C9 are great. Let's see how high they can go up the LCS.
I also think AD carry to support has to be one of, if not the easiest role swap to make, in my opinion, just because
you already know, what the champions do.
You
how the
already know like
plays.
everything about how to play the lane, how all the champions function, what they do, how you should play every matchup. You're just kind of taking a role that in most cases require less from you mechanically, and probably being an AD carry main going to support is going to be a little bit chill in some ways, because sure, you still have to do stuff in team fights and you still have to play out the lane, but the last hitting is gone. It's not as intense to play the team fights, and it's just more so about being smart and having a good understanding of the game, right? And I know, for example, playing with Reckless, that whenever he played support, he was having the time of his life. He was just chilling around with smart movements, and he had such a good understanding of it, and I could easily see it being the same for Zven.
You're not supposed to ruin the illusion, Broxah. All the fans want to believe that when Reckless was stuck on support, that he was just like hating his life, and that this is why they had to get him back to ADC. You're not supposed to be like, he enjoyed it.
Well, Reckless Janna has been a meme for a long time, and that's for a reason. He does love his Janna and his support role.
Is there a team that you guys put money on? I know we just talked about Cloud9 that you think will finish in the top, so I'm assuming that you guys don't think it'll be CLG, so of the teams that you like, the Evil Geniuses, the Team Liquid, 100 Thieves, Cloud9, which one do you guys think is going to be the one that finishes first?
Medic can get the honor of going first.
I'm going to go Team Liquid. I doubted them. I watched enough of their gameplay over the last few weeks to not doubt them that much anymore. I think there's still like errors and still mistakes they make, but they're good enough to finish the regular season at least at the top.
So what the hell happened last split?
I mean, like, yeah. Broxah, do you want to comment on what happened last split for TL? Or?
So, I think whenever you create a team with so many star players, you're always going to need a bit of time to gel, to find your synergy, find your identity, and I think that kind of haunted Team Liquid last split. Also, I must say that in that series against EG, it was game 1, I believe, that Danny had his crazy Baron steal into Pentakill that kind of possibly mental boomed the team a little bit, and had such a big impact on the series. Like, maybe if that one play didn't happen, if Baron didn't heal and Centaur's Smite landed, it would have been a completely different series, and it could have been TL that went to MSI, right?
And TL did still get first in the regular season, so that's all I'm predicting, that they'll do that again, you know?
Yeah, and I think when you look at the team on paper, they just have so much star power, so much experience. All of them have played Worlds, high pressure playoffs matches. I think all they need is to just gel as a team, which they have a lot of time to do, and which they've already been able to work on in the off season, also boot camping in Korea. So I think the more time they get, the stronger and scarier they're gonna look.
Okay. Shifting our attention away from the LCS and now over to the European cousin in the LEC. It seems to be Year of the Duck. Excel is sitting at the top of the standings. I'm sure you guys are losing your mind over there, but Excel, are they finally the real deal?
So I was in Berlin as an analyst for the LEC this previous weekend, and while I had watched some Excel matches from home before going, I must say I was pretty impressed with the way that they were playing the game, because one thing that really stood out to me that they did better than literally every other LEC team this previous weekend is the coordination between all the 5 players, and especially between Mickey, Makoon, and Nukeduck. Like, their map movements are just so good. They always have such a clear plan on what they're playing for, how they're gonna take their 5 champions and move them around the map. And they also have a jungler who's able to actually play aggressive and push for elite, because this is a bigger weakness in the LEC right now, that a lot of teams are afraid of making plays, afraid of doing anything, and the game just stalls out. But Excel is the opposite. They just come in with an aggressive plan. They get a lead with good macro, they close it out right away, and then, it often turns into massive stomps, really.
And I do want to credit a lot. I know Young Buck's been with Excel for a while now, but the addition of Nelson moving over from G2 with Excel. I know that he was just on Summoning Insight. I don't know if you guys watched it, but I've been a big fan of Nelson for a while, and I think when you're talking about some of this macro movement, not only the maturing of players like Mickey, who I think we need to stop thinking, or maybe we haven't been thinking about Mickey as like a younger player for a while now, especially after his tenure on G2, moving off of it. But with the kind of evolution of players like Patrick, like Mickey, who are no longer kind of these up-and-coming players, have now really sharpened their teeth and seeing them pop off, and it kind of allows, I think, someone like Nukeduck to get a second chance. It felt like for a while Nukeduck was hungry, and then he kind of lost that hunger, and he was kind of coasting for a while, and I don't know what's kind of snapped for him, but it does feel like Nukeduck has also really turned a corner, that he's kind of had it reignited in him to be that player that had a lot of hype going for him a couple of years ago.
I think that's just an evolution of the team as a whole. It's very impressive to see, as you say, Nukeduck kind of revitalized, because for a few years it felt like he kind of was just going to slip into obscurity, as a lot of mid laners have done in Europe. And every year it would be the year of the duck, and then they'd start losing, and they'd keep losing, and they'd miss playoffs, and that was it. And that's kind of just the storyline for Excel. I think obviously we don't want to be over eager in the fact that they've only played 5 games, and it's quite possible once again we'll see a collapse. But the way that Excel are playing now isn't based on a certain meta read. It's not based on some cheese picks. It's not based on like, oh, we're just doing this one thing better than everyone else. Their overall macro, their ability to work together as a team, and especially as Broxah said, Marcoon, Mickey, Nukeduck synergy just seems to be on another level, and that's not something you unlearn. It's not a patch comes in and suddenly you can't play jungle mid anymore. You can't bring Mickey up at the right timings anymore. It feels very much like Excel have everything in their toolkit to be a top 3 team in the LEC this season if they keep on their current trajectory.
I guess what's so interesting to me is that Excel for a really long time, this is kind of more of a discussion about like narrative. I don't think any of us here are being like, Excel's going to Worlds for sure, and they're the greatest, like that's not what the narrative is. But Excel has always had this narrative of, they were so close, always the bridesmaid, never the bride. And now that, again, these players have kind of gotten this tenure underneath them, and we have more expectations for them, I think it has to really shift that. While I don't want to hold Excel up and say, it's now or never, at the same time, I kind of am like, Patrick's been good for a while. Mickey's been good for a while. Nukeduck has had his pop-off moments. It's kind of like, it's now or never. If you fail here, the guillotine has to come down of the expectations. I'm tired of being very fragile with Excel for how good and how renowned their coaching staff is behind them, and again the collection of talent that they do have on the roster, as well as for the start that they have. So again, it's not me saying Excel is the best team in Europe, but it is me saying Excel actually really needs to perform now, because I think they are out of excuses and kind of out of time. And I also think that that's just as interesting as a story as when these teams do find success, is that not all the time everyone wins. And I also think stories like Nukeduck, where he was supposed to be somebody, his someday never really came, and then he kind of degraded into nobody, and now he kind of has an opportunity to step back up and say, no, I'm still here. And I think that's exciting if he fails or if he succeeds. But maybe I'm just a masochist.
No, I definitely
think we
agree
all.
with you.
Yeah, I think we need to be a bit mindful of the fact that they just made playoffs for the first time, though. So it's kind of I feel like it, as of right now, it's a tricky organization to hype too much and put too much pressure on, because while they are looking really good right now, there's a pretty big difference between making playoffs for the first time and making it all the way to Worlds, right? And I also think it's in a way, a kind of unlucky timing for them to kind of peak and look this good compared to everyone else, because right now they are the best team. But all the other teams are going to be screaming Excel for weeks and weeks, and they're going to have so much time to catch up and to learn from them that by the time we get to playoffs, all of a sudden they might not be the best team anymore, because there's a really big difference between being someone who catches up to the best team and all of a sudden being the best team and having to make sure no one can reach your level. So they're in a very...
Do you think that that's like a direct response from the star power? Because I agree with you, Broxah, that it's much easier to catch the guy in first than it is to hold the first position. But do we have that that reflex to kind of pull away from Excel because they aren't, like the Perkses or the Carsies or, like the big superstar names of the league? Because I feel like we know that like Vitality should eventually find like that sixth gear and all those players will just turn it on to a degree. Do we not have the same hope for Excel? Do we think that we know where their ceiling is and it's like, oh, they're good and they'll be good for consistently, but they'll never be great?
I don't think we've. It's hard to say where exactly their ceiling is. I think for most of the players, this is an opportunity to get kind of resurgence in a way. I don't think any of them have fully peaked. The only one you could be unsure of is Mickey, I think, because everyone else has been fighting either for redemption or for a chance to prove themselves at Worlds for so many years, right? And they definitely can't be underestimated either, because like you mentioned earlier, they have a very impressive coaching staff behind them. We have Youngbuck, who has been coaching G2 while they were so dominant, who's been on the winning Fnatic in 2018 as well as 19. And then we have Nelson, who just came from G2 now. So many of the different iterations of successful G2 and Fnatic lineups, these guys have seen from the inside, and they've known what worked and what didn't. And now being able to bring all those successful recipes to Excel to really enable all these guys to perform, I think is something that should be making a huge difference for them here in Summer Split.
As far as looking at kind of the rest of the standings, is there any team that particularly stands out for you guys that you think will either start to find that sixth gear and then rise up, or maybe is getting a bit too much of a good head start, whether that be Excel or even like an Astralis that you think will start to slide back?
Yeah, I definitely think Astralis are a little higher than they should be in terms of like total standings. They've had some relatively easy games like BDS, Misfits. They played SK as well, so like the bottom three if we look at current form. And those are the 3 wins they picked up. The battle that's going to be really interesting to me is between Vitality and Astralis, which is not something I thought I would say at the start of this year. But I think those are the 2 teams that are fighting for 6th. And one of those 2 will make it into playoffs and the other won't. And on current form, I would favor Astralis, which is, just a bit of a strange idea to have when you look at the 2 rosters. But Zhonghun especially has been absolutely exceptional. Like the guy knows how to play Pyke, knows how to play vision control through the mid game, and I think he's probably one of the best imports we've had in many, many years in the LEC.
I think Xerxes too has looked like a completely different player on Astralis than he did in NA, right? And I think he's a pretty much living proof that sometimes when you're in a team where things are just not functioning, you can be plugged into a different one where you fit in and all of a sudden you look absolutely amazing, because he's been a pretty outstanding jungler so far in the LEC. One team that I am really excited to see is Fnatic, because to be completely honest, I have no clue what to expect from Fnatic this Summer Split. Like in my mind, they could end up improving. They could finally fix their team synergy problems, get good coordination, because that's what they've been lacking pretty much the entire year, and then they could win the split. But there's also a world where they barely even make it to playoffs, and where maybe they finish 5th or 6th, depending on how everything turns out. And I think Fnatic is going to be such a volatile team in so many ways, and probably be really momentum based, where if they get a good start, maybe they win the split. If everything slowly starts falling apart like we saw in spring, also worth keeping in mind that they are going in with the same lineup and everything, so those memories from spring could easily haunt the players. Then things could fall apart. So very curious to see how the split plays out for Fnatic this summer.
And of course, obviously Fnatic, especially after the collapse in playoffs last split, Yamato talked about how there just wasn't a lot of support for coaching staff, and one of the changes that they've made is bringing in more voices to be behind the scenes to assist the players to make sure that that collapse potentially doesn't happen again. One of the teams that we've kind of been dancing around have been the Mad Lions, who are kind of sitting I guess, yeah, just directly middle of the board, 3-2 right now. A decent schedule. They took down Fnatic, lost to Excel, and lost to Rogue, but otherwise it's been a pretty easy strength of schedule in terms of performing teams right now. SK and Vitality's not super high on our list. Is there anything that you guys think about Mad Lions? Because when you look down that roster, that is a pretty spicy collection of players, but maybe there's just like too much hype to talk about in LEC right now. It feels like there's really exciting rosters in LEC.
Yeah, I think with XL leading the charge, it's kind of easy to forget about Mad, just because they're not quite as good as XL have been so far. But Mad should be 4-1 as well. The only reason they lost to Rogue was because it was like an Elder Drake steal with a Ezreal ultimate, right? Like it was very unfortunate for them, and they just didn't quite coordinate properly on it. But as a team, they look really strong. I think the addition of Niski has really shored up some of the weaknesses that they were finding, especially around mid game. Their decision making looks a lot stronger, and although I think their bottom lane sometimes leaves a little bit to desired, their mid jungle synergy is really working well through the early games. So there's a lot of power coming out from Niski, and obviously a lot of decision making that he's leading them through. And I think that they're definitely a playoffs contender, probably a top 4 contender. The question is whether they can maintain this form and whether they can continue to grow through the rest of the season, which is kind of the question with all the teams. We've only played 5 games. Like, we've still got 13 of them to go.
Yeah, but that's still like a plenty of footage. I understand that it's always like, it's impossible at this point, but I guess like, gun to your head, if you had to pick the 3 representatives for Worlds, I'm hearing a lot of Fnatics, I'm hearing a lot of G2s. Sometimes we're sitting on Excel. Is Mad Lions kind of the other one to go that way? I know, Broxah, you said that Fnatic will either like thrive or die. So are they the team that you think maybe doesn't make it or does make it top 3?
So if I had to pick right now, it's definitely tricky because I think the split could go so many ways. But in this current moment, I would pick G2, XL, and Mad Lions or Rogue. I don't know about the third one, but that would actually be my go-to. I think, like I said, I think Fnatic is going to be such a big question mark that I have no idea how the rest of the split is going to go for them. I think Mad Lions and Rogue should be pretty similar in the sense that they have such a solid foundation that they can keep building on. It seems like the teams are getting along really well, and they should have a pretty easy time growing together. So I could see both of them being really strong by the end of it. Again, Excel, a slight question mark, but I think they should have a good shot of actually making it to Worlds. And then, I mean, G2 is kind of obvious. I would be very surprised if G2 doesn't make it.
For the second year in a row, it would be absurd, really, wouldn't it? If they managed to miss out, considering how good they are. I think I'd align with you. I'm that mad as well.
Dominant that someone's like, you miss Worlds 2 years in a row. That's unthinkable.
Yeah. I mean, it would be absurd. The most decorated team in the LEC ever, with like Caps playing the way he is as well. Like, you could put Caps in with 4 gold players, and you'd probably be able to pick up a few wins in the LEC with how he's currently playing. So, like, the guy's a beast.
Do not threaten me with a good time. That sounds amazing. Okay, turning our attention towards the LCK. I know the last time we chatted, you guys were a bit cold on the LCK. The games were getting stalled out pretty consistently. Have we warmed up to the LCK? Are we back on the Korean hype train, or are we still kind of resident sleeper through this?
I mean, they're still good games, even if they're a bit long. You know, I think we were just a little cursed on that day because it was that the Fred Brion game, right, where it was 34 minutes before First Blood. So I think we were a little bit cold on it because we'd both just experienced whatever that was. But LCK, like, it's still a great region, and it's still a lot of fun to watch, especially with Gen G actually really performing at the moment. I think Gen G looking really strong, and T1 losing their first domestic best of series of the year kind of spices things up a little bit for me. That Gen G roster, watching them today, they are scary, scary beasts. And if they can continue this form and they don't have any more COVID problems, which obviously was what plagued them in spring, I'm very afraid of them as a European fan going into Worlds. And I think T1 should be afraid of them going through the rest of the LCK.
I mean, no doubt we say that obviously the last time that Gen G and T1 met last split was always going to be explosive outside of kind of the COVID complications. I know that T1 did drop the game. I do not want to try to say the Freak's name. How do you say it?
Kwangdong
Kwangdong
Freaks.
Freaks.
I believe that's how it's pronounced.
But they still have Gen.G to face. They still have DRX to face. So T1's kind of like big opponents after coming off of their losses from MSI haven't gone through. Do we still feel faith that T1 is going to be in really good form? I know right now they're sitting 4-1, so still just a single loss behind Gen.G, tied with DRX. Like, do we think that they're still up there, or are we kind of sour on T1 and thinking that this hype is really for the Gen.G?
I think it would be kind of silly to underestimate T1 because they lost one series. And it's not like the series was a stomp either. They did pick up a win and just lost the other two. Freaks team was actually drafting really well. And we picked some very, I don't want to say unconventional picks because we've seen a lot of things coming out of especially bot lane so far this summer split. But one game they played Ashe and Seraphine, the other one they played Senna Seraphine. They played Ornn mid, Swain mid. There was a lot of interesting things going on, but overall, the way that Freaks drafted just seems to... It seemed to catch T1 a little bit off guard, and they just didn't really fully know how to deal with those ridiculously strong team fighting comps. And who knows? I mean, maybe more than anything, this one loss would actually make them even more motivated and even more scary, because now they're gonna want to win another 20 LCK series in a row. So I'm excited to see what they got coming now. But I definitely think the draft didn't favor them and was a big part of why they lost. For me, I think DRX has also been a bit interesting. Not someone I would hype up too much because they haven't really played the top teams yet, but they are 4-1 and they've been looking pretty great overall after being knocked out in spring in quarterfinals. But they still need to face the likes of T1, Gen.G, and Damwon. So there's some big tests coming up. But I'm excited to see how they match up against them because right now they are 4-win and 1 loss as well, same as T1.
What do you guys think Korea has to do to fall out of the running for being this hyper-respected top-tier region? Because consistently they've been putting up good results at internationals. Obviously not winning things, but it's usually multiple LCK teams that are making it to knockouts. It's usually multiple LCK teams that are serious threats, or kind of considered like the really powerful teams within groups. Do you think that there's ever a point when fan sentiment and kind of international sentiment starts to really shift away from them, especially after how, let's say, overhyped T1 was going into MSI with how little experience some of their young players brought to the stage?
I mean, I think like they have to not be the dominant region when it comes to international events. Right? Like LPL, I think it should be everyone's favorites. Like the number 1 seed from LPL should proviso or de facto be the top team going into any international event.
I mean, we say that and they show up in group stage and then they...
Yeah, but they should be. Like, if you just look at the results over the last few years, it's like 6 of the last 8 tournaments LPL teams have won, right? Like, you have to give them the credit now. They are just the better region. But until either Europe or NA or Vietnam or PCS actually starts overtaking LCK and becoming the second best region, LCK is always going to be respected. Although it has been a while, they were still the only force in League of Legends for a long time. And although it's been 5 years since Faker's lifted an international title, the guy still puts on a show whenever he meets up against a team in the finals. Like, they took RNG to 5 games. If they stop doing that, and if it starts being TL versus RNG, and then you see like C9, TL, G2, and RNG in the semifinals of Worlds, well, then LCK is less respected. But right now, even last year, 3 of the 4 semifinals teams at Worlds were LCK representatives, right? So they got to start losing more.
I think the only time where they didn't look like, I don't want to say scary because they've always been kind of scary, but the one time I can think of where it didn't fully go their way was actually Worlds 2018, where there wasn't a single LCK team in the semi-final, and the West was shining because it was IG, it was Fnatic, G2, and Cloud9, right? So outside of that, like, they've just always been so dominant, and I still remember my first Worlds in 2017. Like everyone knew going into the tournament that Korea would win. You literally had no chance playing against Korea, so it was just all about avoiding them as long as you could and try to survive versus the rest. And now it's not that extreme anymore. Obviously, both Europe and China have started competing, but they've been scary for so long. And like Medic said, in recent years, they've also been super dominant. So curious to see if Europe and LPL can slowly take over the throne. LPL have been doing very good and might be able to eventually if they keep it up, but we'll see how it goes.
Moving over into LPL.
Can I quickly just? I think LPL has overtaken LCK. Like I really do. I think right now they should be the de facto best region in the world whenever they come into an international competition. And I think there is some lag from LCK. Like LCK are still very good, but if you look at the last 4 years, like it's LPL. There's just no question in my mind.
There's a obviously like integration with the English-speaking audience into fandom for LPL versus LCK. I feel like LCK has done a much better job of doing that, and that doesn't, mean that there isn't actually threat there. Like we all agree that the LCK has always been such a powerful region, but I'm also on the side of Medic that I do feel that firmly the LCK has taken a backseat to the LPL for a number of years, but it probably doesn't feel that way in a lot of Western fandom because, again, I think the LCK has done such a good job of its branding of being the sophisticated region, the region that connoisseurs of League of Legends watch versus the LPL where Ooga Booga smash multiple times.
I think it depends on how you look at it, to be honest, because I think while LPL has had teams make it really far in winning international tournaments, they have also had teams that did pretty horrible. So I think on average, when it comes to all the LCK teams, the region as a whole has been competing for sure and have often done better than LPL. But they've just had this one single team that would be so dominant and kind of carry the region on their back, a bit like what we've seen with Fnatic in 2018 and afterwards G2, right?
Can I contest you a little bit? Because I see what you're saying of the idea that the LCK is actually just like the consistent, stronger roster, but if you actually go through the LCK victories and how far that they've made it, you have to separate the T1 dynasty from the LCK. And once you take T1 out of it, there's 3 teams. And there's really only 2 teams outside of like how scary Dom1 were with like recency bias of like LCK. And LCK always has this reputation of being like, we have the best coaches. A lot of the LCK coaches went to LPL and did terribly. And a lot of LCK coaches, like the CJ Inch's coaching staff for a long time, historically were like so heavily criticized for how poorly they ran teams with like really good rosters. I just think that there's like almost like a not a really honest look at how strong the LCK is as a region versus the fact they've made the strongest players in like every role. So again, it's not, because there seems to be no nuance for discussion. It's not the LCK is trash. The LCK has done incredible things. But I do think that it's been overhyped for a really long time comparatively to how many teams from the LCK have actually found the highs versus the collective region. But it seems to be that we think that the collective region is always just like such a step above. Anyway.
I also sorry, I'll let you reply, Mads, after you.
No, you can go.
I was going to say, I think because it's been the same names, people notice the LCK more sometimes, in my mind. Because like, if 1 year for China you have Suning, Tez, and JDG, and the next year you have like FPX, IG, and like another RNG, perhaps because the name recognition isn't there, the association doesn't work as easily. Because if I say to someone, hey, name 5 amazing Korean teams, they'll probably go, T1, Dom1, Samsung, other Samsung, and DOX or Kingzone, right? Whereas if you say the same about China, I wonder if people could name as many strong teams, because they've been so fluctuant in terms of who's actually attending Worlds, and then you don't have the name recognition apart from perhaps for individual players.
I agree, but that's also why I would say that the LPL
I'm agreeing with you. I'm just saying,
yeah.
I think the narrative perhaps is built around the fact that people don't recognize the teams as LPL, but rather as individual entities, you know.
And of course, I'm terribly biased in this case.
Oh, sure.
Well, everyone's gonna have a sort of bias, right? I guess if you also look at it like objectively, if we think of like really big Korean teams that did super well, it would be T1, it would be Damwon, and it would be Samsung. And then I think
like if you
those
go
would be
way back, it'd be like a Zubu.
Yeah, but then you go a
Dodgen.
bit too far back, I feel like, right? But then if we think of LPL in the recent years, it would be EDG, IG, FPX,
RNG.
RNG, and then maybe you could add a Suning. So we have like 3 Korean teams versus 4 / maybe 5 LPL teams. So I think it's relatively close for sure. But like I said earlier, it's pretty interesting because I just feel like usually China would just have this one team that was just absolutely insane. But outside of that, it's actually been a pretty close battle.
I get that. I also think it's the era of league we grew up with, right? Because I still think of T1 as this dominant force, and obviously they're still an incredible team. But it was 2017 when they last won anything, and that's
There
5 years ago now. And
There are
That's a
League
long
fans
time
who
ago.
are watching League that don't know how good and how
Yeah.
terrifying T1 were.
They didn't even win Worlds that year. Samsung won Worlds that year. They won MSI that year. Like, that is a long time ago that T1 were actually a not, I'm not going to say contender because they do still contend, but they were actually a winner of anything. And like since then, Damwon have won, well, obviously Samsung won Worlds that year. Damwon have won 1 Worlds, and LCK haven't won anything else.
Yeah, it's been a lot of LPL for sure.
Yep.
As we do kind of turn towards the LPL, just quick reminder, guys, if you guys haven't been keeping up with the standings, it's pretty much exactly as you would expect it to be. Name an LPL team that you remember from showing up at Worlds, and chances are that they're in the top part of the standings. Name a team that you've never heard of and didn't know existed, like Thunder Talk Gaming, and they're at the very bottom of the standings. LPL is currently sitting with Victory 5, Royal Never Give Up, JDG, LNG, Top Esports, Weibo, EDG, Billy, and then it just kind of turns into a giant cluster there. Is there any team that you guys have been watching the LPL that you're really excited about? I know it's a ton of games. We just talked about how the LEC and the LCS have played 5 games. The LPL right now is sitting, Victory 5 is 14-2 right now.
Yeah, just a few games. Just a few games have happened for them. I'm really impressed by V5, especially considering their Dreamers subbing in for Rookie right now. I think that they have looked a lot stronger than I expected them to with a mid lane sub, and obviously sad for Rookie considering that he's not able to get back into the country after he had to go, I think, to his dad's funeral. But Dream is looking very strong, and V5 were a team that I expected a little more from in spring. After their regular season performance, I thought that they'd take the crown and come to MSI, but they once again seem to be on that same trajectory and will definitely, in my opinion, be at Worlds this year. So
I'm personally really excited to see how a team like Suning ends up doing this time around, or Weibo, I guess they're called now. I still have a hard time getting used to that name change, but
It's basically
I think
Facebook.
I guess so. But yeah, I think with the current lineup, with like SoFM is always a jungler that I'm gonna keep an eye on, because I think he's always been slightly different and really interesting compared to many of the other junglers. He does so many creative paths and plays, and seeing that creativity paired with the Shy, with Wang Feng, it's interesting. And who knows what's going to happen in the LPL and who's actually going to make it to Worlds. I feel like you never really know for sure before playoffs come around, because there's so many teams and so many of them can be so scary with a lot of practice and if they're having a good day. But yeah, definitely a team that I'm keeping my eyes on.
It's always super fun when it comes time for Crunch, because there's just so many, as you're saying, Brox, there's so many competent teams in the LPL that can vie for that spot, and that there's only 3 slots. You know, pretty safe bet is probably going to be the Victory 5s, the RNGs, but is it a Top Esports that grabs it? Is it Weibo? Is it EDG that comes back? Maybe you have the JDGs or the LNGs. That there's about 8 contenders for 3 spots, and there's 10 teams in the other leagues, so the very intense race happening over in the LPL. But as we shift out from looking at our global leagues, we've got a brand new champion. Do you guys have any thoughts on? I can't pronounce her name. Is it Nilah?
Nilah, I believe. Yeah.
Nilah?
I'm a little worried because when Mordekai's a juggernaut
Really?
patch, yeah, just a tad. I mean, obviously, Riot are very good at balancing stuff, right? When it comes out and
very good.
They understand how power works and they power balance within a champion, and we never see a champion come out and just dominate solo.
A broken champion.
Yeah.
That's never happened.
But this time, her passive gives her, so if a minion dies when there's more than one person around, you share XP, right? Her passive means that you don't lose XP when you're sharing it. So it used to be it'd be split between 2 of you, but now you both just get the full XP. And Mordekaiser had this for a while, and all you could play was Mordekaiser plus 1 in the bot lane. Like, it was Mordekaiser plus a support, Mordekaiser plus an AD carry, and it dominated the bot lane meta, and they had to take it off his passive because it was too broken. And now they seem to have just put it back on a new champion's passive. So I'm really worried. As a support main, I don't want to have to pig ban Nilah for the rest of my days, because I'm already doing that with Yuumi and with Zeri and with Twitch at the moment for some goddamn reason. Like, there's enough pig ban worthy stuff in bot lane. We don't need a champion that shares XP. Imagine Nilah Zillion. What? You're gonna have so much XP.
Wait, does it bonus the EXP that you're getting, or do you actually just not get to really utilize both passives effectively?
Well, no, because Zillion just he stores XP and then he can level someone up, right?
Yeah.
No, Nilah would just be over leveled by a long way.
Oh, okay, so just over level. I thought you were suggesting that Nilah would then be he gives her the EXP and she turns around and she's like,
gives it back.
This is mine. This is yours.
I don't think that's how it works. Yeah, I'm worried. I'm
a little worried too, but I wonder if Nilah jungle becomes something interesting. Because imagine if you're a jungler and you just full clear your jungle, you walk in lane, you last hit in lane, the laner doesn't even care because they get full XP anyways.
Yeah, because they get the XP.
Yeah, you could just sit there and your mid laner can freak out.
I think they're still not gonna appreciate me taking their cannon because they don't get the gold, it's just the XP, but at the same time, holy, you can get some high levels as a jungler.
Every bronze jungler and bronze mid laner rejoice, because now you can't just screw someone's wave up from your jungler just sitting there for 2 waves, just the cannon. Okay, guys, that is it from us. Please do not forget, we just talked about it in the LCK rundown, that T1 is going to be battling up against Gen.G, so we will get to see if T1 are still on form or if Gen.G are the real deal to be terrified of. We'll see you guys all in a couple of weeks for episode 8 of Recall, so we'll see you then.